Thank you all again for joining today's webinar, Retention Strategies Based on Angler Surveys. I'd like to introduce Stephanie Hussey, State R3 Program Director, to get things started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. With the increases in fishing participation experienced throughout the country last year, many state agencies undertook angler surveys to better understand the needs of these new and reactivated anglers to inform retention efforts this year. Building on what Tennessee and Wisconsin shared at our state marketing workshop earlier this year, we brought a few states together today, Arizona, Nebraska, and Oregon, to share insights from their angler surveys and implication and ideas for retention marketing strategies in their states. And first, I'd like to introduce Brittany Carney, Marketing Project Manager with the Arizona Game and Fish Department.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here today. I'm going to go over our angler retention strategy here at Arizona Game and Fish Department, as well as an angler survey that we deployed in 2020 and how those results are impacting our efforts in 2021 and beyond. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview. I'll walk through that strategy, our survey results, as well as our next steps. Next slide. So in recent years, we've seen angler growth, which of course reached a peak in 2020. And so we've really realized the need for this customer retention strategy specifically for anglers so that we can keep those who are new as well as those who are returning, particularly in the last year. And with that, we really wanted to identify innovative opportunities that we could connect with these anglers from the point of when they make their initial license purchase all the way through to the point of renewal, as well as creating meaningful content that would be mapped to all stages of the buyer's journey. So not just those who are new and keeping them, but also bringing people back who have lapsed. Next slide. So with that, we wanted to get a feel for who these people were. Were they new? Were they reactivated? And so we took a look at our online resident fishing and community fishing license purchases that took place from March to August 2020. So that was really our peak in 2020. And we compared them to data that we had from 2015 to 2019 as a benchmark. And from there, we were able to identify three key groups. Those who were new, which means they weren't recorded in our 2015 to 2019 set. Those who were retained, so we had them in that set, but their latest purchase was 2019, and those who were reactivated. So they're in that set, but their last purchase was made prior to 2019. And one thing that we also wanted to keep in mind with this is our new numbers would also potentially include those who made their first online purchase in 2020 because we weren't comparing to data with third-party vendors like Walmart and others. So that was something that we really wanted to keep in mind, but to get a feel for essentially what was our split between new, retained, and reactivated. Next slide. And so with that, we ended up with a data set of just over 67,000 resident anglers. Of those, 78% were new, 10% were retained, and 12% were reactivated. And of those who reactivated, 48% last purchased in 2018. And you can see here how those percentages dropped as year over year passed. And so for us, this really reinforced the need for this retention strategy because if we can't keep them, we'll lose them. And so this was really a driving factor for us to really get a better feel for who these people were and how we could make sure that we're retaining them year over year. Next slide. And so with that, we decided to deploy a survey to those resident anglers when that March to August set. Next slide. And with that, we wanted to see what were some of their motivations? How often had they been fishing in Arizona? What were they hoping to gain in their development as an angler? And so with that, we ended up having 57,576 anglers that we could reach via email. And so that's who we sent this out to. And we ended up with just over 3,000 responses. And even though this was only a 6% return rate, this was really important to us because we didn't give any kind of an incentive for completing the survey. It was really just help us help you. And so to have that kind of response just to help us improve our communications with them and how we can support them as anglers was really exciting for us and really sets us up for future surveys if we are able to do other things, the type of responses that we can expect. Next slide. And so with that, I've covered here the questions that we asked in the survey as well as the results. Those are in red, are the ones that were the highest percentage, but we really focused in as well as those second and third highest responses. A lot of those did tie into some of our new or reactivated anglers, though we did see the most responses to this particular survey were our avid anglers, which makes sense because, you know, they are the most likely to want to help us with them in their angling journey. But we were really excited to see the responses that we got from those who were new reactivated as well. You can see here our first question, how many years have you been fishing in Arizona? We saw a really great turnout for those who've been fishing for 4 years or less. As well as in our second question, when was the last year that you purchased an Arizona fishing license? 12.8% having been their very first year that they have ever purchased one, and 16.9% having their last purchase been prior to 2017. So this was really encouraging for us that we were, you know, going to get data that we wanted, as well as those avid anglers too, so we make sure that we don't lose them. And so this gave us an opportunity to really compare the answers or the responses that we got in the survey to those respondents, depending on how many years they've been fishing. And we threw in this third question here about whether or not it was their first year they purchased a license online, not only to try to get a better feel for how that's impacting that 78% new that we had, but also just what's that shift to purchasing online. And this is something that we can track year over year too, where, you know, is it something where we saw a spike in online purchases because of COVID, or is this something where we're actually having a shift in the purchasing behavior of our anglers? Next slide. And so one of the main questions that we wanted to ask was, what's your motivation for fishing? This will really help us in terms of messaging for our advertisements and how we're really positioning some of these campaigns. We want to make sure that we're addressing why they want to fish. And so not too surprisingly, we did see a high number that were, their motivation was outdoor recreation, relaxation, time with family and friends. But we did have some notable other responses, including a couple that specifically called out COVID as a reason that they wanted to be or got into fishing. And so that was exciting for us, and something that we're going to keep an eye on too, is just, you know, as more and more people are joining or are becoming anglers, how are their motivations shifting, and is that something that we can address? Next slide, please. And with that, we also wanted to know, what are the best ways that we could provide them information to help them continue to develop as an angler? So not only for those who are new or for those who have lapsed and come back, but even retaining those that have been consistent anglers. And so we saw that our highest percentage was on the monthly emails, which was good for us because this is something that we offer currently. So it was another thing that we could really take something that we're doing and see how we can elevate it to meet their needs. We also saw short informational videos was highly rated here, so that was exciting for us. That's something that we're going to be approaching in this year and in future years, and we'll get into that a little later in the presentation, as well as access to a social media group where they can ask their fellow anglers questions. This for us was really exciting because this is something that we just started last year. We have a Facebook group, Fish AZ, where it's exactly this. It's a forum to ask questions, share pictures, and all of those things. So we're excited that this is something that we've introduced. That's something that is they're also seeking as well. Next slide, please. And with that, we also wanted to know, where are they currently getting this information? So we could, as we're sharing this information that they're looking for, that we're getting it in front of them where they're currently expecting it or where we can currently find them. We did find with this question that about 61% said they aren't currently receiving communications from us. That said, about 4% of those respondents who said that also selected things that are Arizona Game Fish communications. So this was important for us, knowing how we can position these things that we're currently doing, make it more obvious that maybe it is coming from us so that we can continue to be seen as thought leaders in the space. But it was also good for us, or this question specifically was a good learning for us, because 40% of all other responses listed our website. And so for us, this was just something, as we're looking to build out more of these surveys, how can we make sure that we're framing these questions or providing answers in the questions that's what people are hoping to respond with. And so even though our responses were things that are on our website, we didn't put the website itself. So that was a good learning for us. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Brittany. If you wouldn't mind just slowing down slightly, I think people are having a little trouble hearing you. So if you could slow down just a bit, that would be great.
Oh, of course. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you.
And so on our survey results for these final 3 questions, how far do you usually travel to fish in Arizona? This was a really interesting question for us because we do find there is some seasonality in Arizona. So if you're taking part in our community fishing program that's in the valley, that's fantastic in the winter and in the spring when our weather is great, but there might be a little less of that in the summer when it's 110. And then that's when we really see some of our northern lakes get a lot of traffic, and so it's it's a way to beat the heat. It is a little further away, but it's a completely different surroundings with you know, pines and all of that. And so that was something that we thought was interesting, that though the highest number were those who are traveling to remote distances, we did also have a good number where they're traveling to locations near and far equally. And so that impacted a campaign that I'll cover later in the presentation here, but that really wanting to not focus on one or the other exclusively. And so that was a good finding for us. We also asked 2 optional questions, so primary language spoken in the home, as well as number of children that are under the age of 18 at home. We did see the highest percentage here was English. A couple of things that we're trying to keep in mind with that was the email to access the survey, as well as the survey itself was in English, but we're also looking for opportunities where we can start to introduce Spanish outreach. We've seen good success, especially in angling opportunities that we have presented in Spanish. So that's something that we're focusing on, even though, you know, we do have a majority that are speaking English. It was still really good for us to know that this is something that has a need. And in addition to that, with the children under the age of 18, we did see that the highest percentage don't have kids at home, which makes sense if you're looking at those avid anglers that have been fishing for 25 years. They may be retirees, they may be older, but we did see 28% that have at least 1 to 2 kids in the home. And so for us, this really drives home not only that we do have a nice mix of these anglers that we're going to need to be addressing, but also the opportunity with future surveys to hone in on some of these specific audiences that we really want to see. You know, generally we can see what our responses are from anglers, but what do we see when we target certain groups specifically? Next slide, please. And so that takes us into our next steps for our angler retention strategy. Next slide. And of course, as you know, like I said, we're definitely taking the context of our responses, or putting our responses in the context that we did have that majority that were avid anglers, but that there's really good things that we can mine out of the survey from those new anglers, reactivated anglers. And again, like I said, it's a great opportunity for us to, for future surveys, really focus in on those new anglers, active social families, some of those groups where we want to learn more about them and how we can continue to support them as well. Next slide, please. We're also looking for opportunities this year to develop and share information based on that highly requested content. So everything from information that's about specific types of fishing in Arizona. Is it bass fishing? Is it trout fishing? Tips for beginners, specifically being able to support those new anglers, since we know they are making up a significant group of our current anglers. And of course, if we continue to see the angler growth that we've seen in recent years, we are going to have a significant number of new anglers in our mix. We're also looking at our community fishing program resources, making sure that those are accessible so that as people are, you know, as more competing activities come in and they're trying to, you know, potentially fit fishing back into their life as new things continue to start taking precedence, that those community fishing opportunities are there so that they can fish close to home and it doesn't have to be an all-day event. In addition to that, in post-COVID, we're going to be looking at fishing clinics in zip codes that have a high percentage of new anglers or percentage of anglers in general, so that we can get these events out in areas that people are really looking for these experiences and you know, potentially new angling opportunities. Next slide. We're also looking at ways that we can apply these to future campaigns. And so a great example of that is the spring and summer campaign that we have going this year. Currently, our spring campaign is going on now, and that is focusing on community fishing. So we're taking a look at those active social families, pulling out you know, resources that they can use, like our community fishing guide, and pointing out that it's easy to fit into their busy schedules and that we have 49 lakes across the valley that are, you know, potentially close to home for many of these. We're also, for the first time, this creative is in both English and Spanish. And so we're really excited about this. And then we have the opportunity in the summer to kind of flip the creative on this campaign, focusing on those high country lakes. And so beating the heat, getting away from home, you know, it is a longer drive, but you can factor it into a family vacation. And so just really trying to keep fishing top of mind to these groups and really make sure that it just becomes a normal part of everyday life and that we don't let them lapse. Next slide, please. And with that, we're also taking a look at developing an automated customer journey via email. And this is really going to address not only new anglers, but also those who are, you know, potentially lapsed, or even those that are, you know, we're retaining. And so this will be a series of emails that'll kick off once an individual purchases a license. We'll have them identify key areas of interest and then deploy emails addressing those topics, and specifically reminding anglers of the renewal dates when they're coming up, and in the event that their license does expire, letting them know that it has expired, so they have an opportunity to renew. And so this is something that we're really working on, building out this robust journey. And in the meantime, we didn't want to miss the opportunity to still address these needs. And so we have these renewal emails you can see here on the slide that are going out monthly, reminding people that their license is expiring in the following month, and the opportunity to click through and purchase their license all in one spot. So next slide, which I think is the last slide. Yep. So these are just a couple of the ways that we're really taking a look at what we've learned in this survey, and how we can apply this to what we're doing in this year, next year, and beyond. And really, as we start to come out of COVID, how we can even expand on this even further outside of the digital space. And so this is a really great survey for us. We're really looking forward to learning more about these anglers and learning how we can better retain them. And so that's it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brittany. Really appreciate all you shared here today. And a reminder to folks that we'll address questions at the end. So feel free to put them in the chat for after all the presentations. And now I'd like to introduce Jane Gustafson, Marketing Manager with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission.
Thank you, Stephanie. Boy, that was a great presentation, Brittany. I really enjoyed hearing a lot about what you guys are doing. And my presentation is going to be kind of a springboard off of that to talk a little bit about what Nebraska is doing. And you're going to see a lot of commonalities between the survey efforts that Brittany talked about, and some of the things that they're doing, and some of the things that we're doing. And so I will take you into what we're doing as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So hopefully this happened to a lot of different states, and this is familiar, but in Nebraska, something good did happen in 2020. And we also, as with everyone that has alluded to this before, we noticed a good bump in our angler numbers. We had over 41,000 new resident anglers and over 20,000 new non-resident anglers. And we also had a good chunk of reactivated anglers, people that had been lapsed 2 years or more in buying a fishing permit. We had over 51,000 residents and a little over 6,700 non-resident anglers that came back to the fold and participated in fishing. So we thought, you know what, this is great, and much like Arizona, we want to keep them. What can we do to keep those folks? And so as we were discussing it internally, we thought, well, we should do a survey and find out a little information, and we should separate these two groups just to learn if there were any significant differences between their motivations, their behaviors, and some other things, or if there were commonalities between them. So we decided, let's get some survey data. Next slide, please. So the good news for us is that we found out a lot of these groups, or both of these groups, have a lot of different things in common. And I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of our survey because we suffer a little bit from not requiring email addresses for our angling permit purchasers. So we can't get everybody, but we did get a nice group, a nice representative group of each of these groups participating in our survey. And we did offer an incentive. We offered a $50 gift card to Cabela's. And so that may have helped a little bit. We always feel it doesn't hurt to offer that, and it helps with our folks participating a little bit. So what did we find out? Well, we found out the groups have a lot in common, and I'm just going to have a few sample slides here showing that one of the things they had in common was who they went fishing with. And if you'll notice here, the biggest group was friends, but that second biggest thing is that green bar showing that a lot of them went with youth. They went with someone under 16. So that was a good thing. Next slide, please. We also noticed another thing they had in common is where they went fishing. We had a lot of folks that went to lakes and reservoirs, and the second most highest option was the ponds and sand pits. So they're fishing in a lot of the same locations, which we thought, again, is good because that tells us that the groups are finding places that they can fish near them, and most of the opportunities that we have are lakes and reservoirs in Nebraska. Next slide, please. The really good news was when we asked the question about what is the likelihood that you will continue to fish in 2021, it was a resounding yes. Both groups said they were very likely to continue fishing. And so we thought, okay, that's good. Let's think about what we can do for them to help increase that likelihood and to help them follow through on their plans. Next slide, please. So the survey asked what resources they might want that would help them fish more. And no surprise to probably anyone listening here, it's a knowledge of convenient places to fish near them, opportunities near them, more fishing piers or access on nearby water bodies, and a better knowledge of fishing techniques. We also tried to segment out and ask about the types of information that would be helpful to them. And again, this is probably no surprise to anybody. They wanted up-to-date fishing reports and information. They wanted to know where they could go fishing, again, where they could fish near them, and they wanted specific information that could help them improve their chance of catching the species that they were after. So if they were after crappie, they wanted tips on catching crappie. If they were catfishing, they wanted tips on catching catfish. Next slide, please. And lastly, we said, okay, where would you like to get that information? How can we deliver it to you in a way that you like to receive your information? And overwhelmingly, the answer for both groups was emails. They wanted this information emailed to them. The second most popular was social media, Facebook and Instagram. And the third most popular item, which was close to social media, was they wanted to be able to find this information on our website. Next slide, please. So we put our heads together here and had a really great joint team communication effort here, where it wasn't just the communications folks, it wasn't just the fisheries folks. We came together and talked about how can we take this information and utilize it to do what they're looking for and provide these resources for folks. So we talked about a lot of different topics and ideas, and what we settled into was, and I will note it as number 3 here, but I'm going to bring it up first because it is the place where all of these things could reside. We talked about having a web page that had all of this great content that we were going to develop and that we would talk about on our website as a resource, and using the things that we already had existing and pulling them onto that page. We talked about then creating a weekly calendar of topics that we could write about. So we could use content that we already had, we could create new content, but we could address a lot of these topics of where to find places to go fishing, what type of equipment to use, different things that they could do to learn new skills and build the skills that they already have. And you'll note that second bullet there, we really wanted to make sure we had a mix of information so that beginners would find things to help them on their angling journey. But those who were already fishing would also help them find things that would build the skills that they already had, or allow them to try new things. Maybe they wanted to try fly fishing or branch out into a new type of fish to go after. And then we really took a team approach. We shared assignments and we collaborated together to talk about who was going to do what content and how we were going to distribute it. And we focused in on those survey results. That really was central to everything that we were doing. We really were trying to push, how can we make sure that we build their knowledge of where they can go fishing and how they can find opportunities for them wherever they might live in the state, or where they might be going on vacation if they wanted to go someplace else. We wanted to build their knowledge of fishing techniques. So give them things from knots to equipment to where to cast to what do I do if I'm on a boat versus if I'm fishing from a jetty. We were trying to figure out how to update fishing reports and information, and we actually came up with a good solution that Arizona alluded to, Brittany from Arizona alluded to there as well, and so I'll talk about that. But again, we wanted to make sure we didn't forget that point. And then we also wanted to, make it personal. How can we give them information to improve their chances on whatever type of species they were after? Next slide, please. So once we figured, okay, we started building this content, we started creating it, how are we going to utilize it? So we also created in our list, we like to do lists in Nebraska, we created a list of places that we could use this content. We thought about where can we put it internally? How can we send it out through all of the different channels that we have, through our website, through blogs, through agency magazines, through public information appearances, different things that we have going on. How can we push that information out? And then we looked externally. How can we push it out to people outside of our realm? How can we send it out in news releases and follow up to get those news releases shared in local publications, local print publications? Do we have opportunities in print publications across the state who welcome us as guest columnists? We want to make sure we use those. And we also wanted to do content marketing. If we have it on our website, if we have it in our social channels, what can we do to keep that information out in front of folks? Can we do some paid social with it? Can we send it out in emails? Can we have our public information officers talk about it on their radio shows, talk about it on TV appearances, put it in their columns that they do for their local newspapers? We also wanted to think outside the box. And that's kind of where I come back to this up-to-date fishing reports and information. We knew that's a challenge to do. It's one of the things that any type of an angler wants to know. Where's the bite hot? Where are people fishing? Where are they having success? But it's the hardest nut to crack sometimes to get that information out in a timely fashion. So we wanted to think about that, and we wanted to think about how could we also take all this great information we have and repackage and repurpose it into maybe products that are new that didn't already exist. And how could we leverage partnerships to help us achieve those goals? Next slide, please. So one of the first things we did was we created a schedule. And this is just a sample of one of the schedules that actually Larry Pate put together with Jerry Kane, one of our other folks, and talked about the things that we were going to do. And they focused on, you know, what are some of the seasonal opportunities that people have. That's why we hit trout fishing first. That was a good thing for us on a seasonal basis because we do a lot of trout stocking in the spring. So we created the schedule and what those topics were going to be. And then you'll notice here there is a news release. And that was one of the first steps in putting things together, was having our news releases so that they could go out and kick off getting that information spread out to the public. Next slide, please. So once we started getting that content out, we focused on sharing it through every channel we could think of. So our social media folks would put out really great social posts that would take people back to that website that we had created that had this information on it. We pushed our news releases out, and we noticed when they would get picked up by local publications across the state. We had our bloggers talking about it and bringing in those things, and then again doing social media to promote the blog posts. And we did posts on our own website and in our own agency publication, Nebraska Land. Next slide, please. And then we just kept sharing that content, and we looked at all the other places that we had content within the agency. And this was a great page that we had from our Going Fishing publication that talked about equipment. We were able to repurpose that into social media posts, into blog posts, into articles, into email blasts. And it just was a great way for us to leverage content that we had and augment it and push it out to people and have them find it, so that they constantly kept this idea of fishing in front of them, but also gave them tools that they could use to go out and take out and go fishing with. Next slide, please. So we needed to think outside the tackle box on some things, and we thought that that would give us some great things we could do as well. So one of the things we did is we thought, you know, we always are trying to struggle with how to provide up-to-date fishing reports and information, but we don't necessarily have to provide them as an agency. We had started an online Facebook group, and this is something that Brittany talked about as well. We started an online Facebook group to really provide a Nebraska fishing community so that people would have places to go to find other angling people that were interested in angling and share their news, share their pictures, you know, ask questions. And so we thought, boy, that's a great way to leverage something that already exists to remind people that this tool is out there and they can provide information on it about what's going on with them. And they can also ask questions and see where other people are reporting, hey, where's the bite hot? Have the crappie started to spawn in eastern Nebraska? What's going on in western Nebraska? When's the walleye spawn happening? So there was a lot of up-to-date fishing report information that was already being shared there. We just needed to steer people to that resource. Next slide, please. We also looked at repackaging and repurposing things that we had. I talked a little bit about this before, but we have this incredible resource in this Going Fishing guide, and we took parts of it and pulled it out and created a fish ID key that was something that we thought would really be helpful to beginning anglers or anglers looking to build their knowledge and learn what they were catching and enhance their experiences. So we took things like this and we took them apart and we repackaged them. We took the fish ID key part out of the Going Fishing Guide and repackaged it as a standalone piece. So we really tried to look at, what have we already created? What could we repurpose? What could folks get some use out of? Next slide, please. Also in the theme of repackaging and repurposing, we looked at some of our urban areas and some of our community areas and said, we've got bits and pieces of techniques and tips in this Going Fishing Guide. We've got a lot of information on our GIS and our public information atlas about where to go fishing. And then we've got little write-ups in our fishing guide that talk about locations in different areas. Let's put them all together and let's create what we call a trip planner, so that it helps people who may be living in Omaha, Nebraska, figure out, where can I go to fish near me? That was one of the things they wanted to know. Where can I go to fish near me? Give me a little information about that location so that I know if there's a parking lot, restrooms, if I have kids, maybe is there a playground there? Can I take my picnic lunch? Where is it at? So I know where I can go close and how much time it may take me to get there. What can I catch there? We also were a little tongue-in-cheek, and we also thought, well, some people that may live in a metro area want to go right outside the metro area. So we created the Escape Omaha Fishing Trip Planner that gave them those same types of information and opportunities, but just right outside the Omaha metro area. Next slide, please. Lastly, we looked at our partnerships and thought, what can we do with partners to push information out, reach new people, and create new opportunities? So we partnered with the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, groups like Trout Unlimited and the Nebraska Fish and Game Association to come up with some new partner opportunities or revitalize some old partnership opportunities to do some of these things. Next slide, please. One of the biggest things that we're doing right now is we were thankful and happy to be the recipient of a state R3 program grant from RBFF to help us really focus in on those 2020 new anglers and reactivated anglers. I mentioned before that we only have email addresses for some of our customers because we don't require it. So we wanted to put together a program where we would do regular emails to customers with email addresses, but we were struggling to figure out how we would reach out to those folks who didn't have an email address in our system. And this grant is allowing us to do some kind of innovative things where we are taking the information in our permit database and working with our advertising agency to do some reverse search and targeting on social media. In other words, we're sneakily using the information that we have to find their social media accounts and then serving them up memes that we hope will get their attention and remind them of the fun of fishing and get them to click on it and go to our website and learn more about what they could be doing. We've also added some programmatic IP targeting and reverse search targeting through Google, and we've been able to kind of do that same little sneaky backdoor method to serve our messages up to folks and serve these ads up to them to remind them of the benefits of fishing, the fun that they had last summer, and again, get them to our website to find more information and hopefully purchase their permit. Next slide, please. And these are just a couple more examples of the things that we're doing with that, with those memes, trying to follow them on social media and keep fishing in front of them, keep it top of mind. And then an email blast that we are sending to our new anglers from 2020 and our reactivated anglers. And in the best spirit of repurposing, we're also sending it to our the rest of our anglers so that we can retain them and keep them in the fishing fold and keep them out on the Nebraska waters. Next slide, please. And the last thing I mentioned is that we were doing some working with our partners and doing some events. And so our community fishing night folks have gotten in the spirit of partnerships and are trying to expand what we do when we offer community fishing nights. So we offer these opportunities to go out in the community and we invite people to come in and fish, and we have tackle, we have bait, we have the experts that can help them do things, but we tried to augment that a little bit this year and offer what we call a two-for experience. So they have the opportunity to try fishing, but they also have the opportunity to build their skills and learn something new. So we've added some fly fishing classes, some bow fishing, and some species-specific things with catfishing to these opportunities so they can come to an event and do two different things. Next slide, please. So that is kind of a really quick snapshot of the different things that are going on in Nebraska and how we have tried to survey some folks and take the information that they gave us to provide tools that will help them be successful in angling and be reminded that fishing is a really great fun thing to do and build their skills. And I think Stephanie noted that we will have questions at the end, but we look forward to hearing the questions and hearing things that you might have. I have some of my cohorts here with me that can answer regarding some of the things that they're working on. And we thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you.
Thanks, Jane, for sharing all this great content. And yes, please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them after the presentations. And now I'd like to introduce Amanda Soya, Outreach and Engagement Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Jane and Brittany, for doing a wonderful job outlining so many different opportunities available in retention efforts for the new in 2020 cohort and others moving forward. You'll note that Oregon is probably going to be rather consistent with much of the presentation information that the other two shared, and that a lot of those things are also what we're doing, and we're taking a bit of a different approach in other ways. If you can move to the next slide, please. So what I'm just going to focus on is a brief background on how we got to the survey development that we did, the survey that we executed, some of the key learnings, and then how those learnings impacted our retention efforts throughout the duration of the research and on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, there was an increase in salesmen. We found that out right away, but then the question was, who are these people? Why are they buying? And how do we make sure we can continue that? Oregon sort of took an approach at it by saying, all right, we have 5 prongs here we need to be paying attention to. The first is we need to be looking at the sales data to figure out as much information as we possibly can to inform a lot of the efforts that we have going on. Secondly, we needed to do something to be able to query the electronic licensing systems that we had. ODFW launched a new electronic licensing system in 2019. But as a result of that, we didn't have the ability to query both systems at the same time, our former electronic licensing system data with our current. And we needed to develop custom reporting that was going to allow us to bridge those two to do that in-depth analysis. The next step, once we had that information, was to be moving forward in crafting and then executing a customer survey, and then making sure that we did some very thoughtful analysis of the work that we got from there. That information was going to help us craft that customer retention plan, but when we were doing that, we wanted to make sure that the retention plan didn't just live within the information and education division, which is where the marketing and communications is held in our agency. We wanted to ensure that the entire agency had some skin in the game, and so we worked very hard to ensure there were agency-wide implications in the retention efforts. And another key aspect is this research wasn't going to happen overnight. We couldn't execute the survey immediately. Understanding the sales data that we had, that wasn't going to happen quickly. That being said, we needed to be executing some outreach strategies immediately, and that needed to continue through the duration of the research period. So we worked very hard to utilize information that we already knew about customers, glean information from what the national research in the R3 community was putting out, and other information that any other states that were also undergoing these efforts were learning. And we used that to inform our efforts, and then as we learned more, refined them along the way. At the end of the day, the ultimate goal is we need to figure out how in the heck are we going to retain these new customers, the pandemic participants, the folks that were new to us in 2020, and what do we need to do to be able to sell to them in 2021 and moving forward. Next slide, please. So the implementation of the survey. This is going to be kind of hardcore for the data nerds, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. I'm going to gloss over a lot of this in the interest of time. The design for our survey was particularly important in the way that we chose the individuals participating in it. We made sure we had an interdisciplinary team. ODFW is lucky in that we have a senior economist and an economist on staff at the agency, as well as a series of other social scientists. We were able to leverage those individuals in addition to folks in the information and education division. We also had a group of key stakeholders that worked within the director's office and functioned across the agency and all of the divisions, so that we had folks that were able to participate and give us information that would be helpful to them for that agency-wide implication. And that also made sure that we were asking the critical questions in the survey development process. Like the other folks have shared in this call already, we used a lot of the data from our licensing system to help us refine the questions, determine who was going to be asked the questions, and also to help us do some additional analysis and cross comparison once we got the responses back. We did do 2 pilot surveys, one internally with staff members and one to a small group of customers. The survey ended up being rather lengthy. It was about 20 minutes long. As a result, we wanted to ensure that we did have some form of incentive. We offered via raffle $150 gift cards to, you name it, Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop. We had 3 email reminders that went out, and the customers had 5 weeks to respond to the survey. Knowing that we needed to automate and we had a limited amount of time and staff capacity to do all of this work, we chose to use a digital distribution tool. In our instance, we used something called Allegiance. That also helped us do a lot of the analysis up front. We did a series of different analysis types, and we can talk about that in Q&A for those that have questions. Next slide, please. The sample and response. For those that may or may not be familiar with the term, the sample is essentially the population for which you're going to be surveying and how you go about comprising them. We had 5 unique groups that we chose for our survey because our survey was not just specific to angling. The results that I'm sharing with you today will be, but I wanted to ensure that there was some transparency in terms of how this information was comprised. We made sure that we were selecting people that were new to the agency as of 2020, new in 2019, and new in 2018. Why, you might ask? Because we wanted to know what the differences were. What makes new in 20 different from new in 19? What makes them different from new in 18? What was a regular angler and a regular hunter? These are our avid customers. These are the folks that consistently come back to us. And these are also things that we needed to make sure that we were comparing and contrasting against to find out what really made the folks that were new in 2020 novel and unique to us. We sampled about, via the survey, approximately 50,000 folks. We had just shy of a 20% response rate, which worked very well for us and having a high level of confidence in information that we had to inform our retention efforts and investment efforts moving forward. Next slide, please. So asked and answered, what were some of the questions we asked? Like I said, it was a 20-minute survey, and I do have the full survey and a report on all of the analysis that we did that is available to those of interest. This is just a mere snapshot of some of the more salient points for the brief presentation today. So have you ever participated in angling? Yes, most of these folks have already had prior experience. We were not talking to brand new people who I had to explain, this is a rod, this is a reel, this is what fishing is. This also meant that we wanted to understand where their participation came from. Most of them participated as a youth, but it has been some significant time since participation occurred. That meant we needed to do some training and, for lack of a better term, remedial information needed to be provided to get people back up to speed. Another key thing we needed to find out from our retention efforts for targeting was, where are these people willing to go? This didn't make a whole lot of surprise for us in that because of COVID and all of the COVID restrictions that were in place, travel was not something a lot of people were particularly interested in doing. As you note here, about 61% of the individuals that were the brand new to us in 2020, they specifically stated they wanted to be within 50 miles. That is helpful for us because we also noted that most of these individuals in the 2020 cohort, the new in 2020 cohort, they lived on the Interstate 5 corridor, which is familiar with Oregon. It's the main population center of the state. Most of the largest cities are aligned along that corridor. Next slide, please. All right, so now we know that they're sort of not new to it. They've had prior exposure, but what is their skill level at? What we did is we provided a simple questionnaire for them to identify. These were the definitions that we provided to them. And the largest percentage of these folks noted that they were competent, meaning that they had some level of experience, but they probably needed some additional training. You'll note that the second level was novice, and proficient wasn't really that far behind. That did lead us to realize the type of content we needed to be crafting needed to center around this type of level. Next slide, please. What information could be provided? The agency had previously prioritized a lot of how-to content information. What we learned is we needed to be doing some shifting to focusing more heavily on where-to content. Beginner skills versus advanced skills was of greater level of interest. Once again, that's in alignment with the previous information we gleaned on the other slides. We also learned mentorship wasn't a particular issue for us. These individuals had access to someone that could provide that introduction to angling, and they also understood how to contact those. Next slide. So how did this information impact our retention efforts? One of the first things we did was wanted to find a way that we could make people more readily navigate to this information quickly. We launched what was called a start fishing page. We did this also for the other product categories. So start clamming, start crabbing, start waterfowl hunting, start big game hunting, etc. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll note that there's a small table of contents that allows you via anchor links to quickly get to the specific areas that you're interested in. There are hyperlinks to articles specific to that. So it was a one-stop shop for folks to be able to get access to this information, navigate therein, and we're consistently adding content to this to make it a more robust resource moving forward. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we needed to prioritize and restructure much of the where-to information that we had. We do have a document and a book that was published called Easy Angling Oregon, and it focuses on 101 places to go within the state, specifically designed for folks to have easy access and a quick ability to get up to speed and have fun. The recreation report is a weekly report or a digest, shall you say, of fishing conditions and angler success. This allows people a quick insight into what's hot right now. We relaunched our trout stocking schedule. You can fish for trout 365 days a year in Oregon, and it's also something that's very friendly to beginners. Our disabled angler access map, we made sure that this was also provided and updated. It's Google-based, and it has locations throughout the state. This was important to us because we recognized that not everyone coming to us was going to be at the same ability level. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible. The next is the 50 places to go within 60 miles of X. We launched a series of versions of those, and if you go to the next slide, I'll provide you with an example. Internally, we refer to them as 50s and 60s, but what it really refers to is a map. Here's 50 places to go fishing within 60 miles of X location. Now, it's sort of a misnomer for us to be calling them 50s and 60s because we do have, for example, 60 places to go within 90 minutes of Lane County, or 95 places to go within X city. So, and that all is once again based on that I-5 corridor where the large population centers were based. We used a lot of the zip code information that we were gleaning from the retention survey that we had executed, as well as our licensing data to pinpoint where the largest percentage of these folks would be going. We also utilized the information that folks weren't really wanting to travel. So what could we do to get the biggest possible bang for the buck? This gives, these particular lists are also available for download. It is dynamic with the Google Maps. You can pin locations, and it does give additional information about the amenities specific. So if there's a boat dock, if there's an ADA available restroom, there's loads of these throughout the state that are available for folks to view. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned, we've done a whole bunch of outreach going on. This is just a few of the more interesting ones of late. Certainly the ODFW Messenger is a new monthly e-newsletter. I'll show you an example of that in the next slide. The targeted advertising is sort of new for the agency in that we were expanding that significantly, not only from radio advertising, print, and digital, but we were also utilizing one of those state R3 grants from RBFF to pursue OTT, which stands for over-the-top advertising. That's advertising that takes place on connected and streaming devices outside of the cable networks. Pop-up fishing events, we created some opportunities through our angler education program and our certified angling educators, the volunteers themselves, to kind of having these show up and fish events where the gear is provided and then there's instructors there to be able to help you through that process. As I mentioned, there's much, much more that we've done, but I've got 15 minutes and a whole lot to talk about. So next slide, please. This is an example of the ODFW Messenger. It's one of the most powerful tools we currently have in our arsenal simply as a result of reach. We have approximately 600,000 customers that are subscribed. We average around a 30% open rate, somewhere between a 9 and 17% click-through, with a highly engaged audience. We use GovDelivery for it. And what we do is we just feature content specific to what's seasonal and appropriate. And we also want to make sure that we're focusing hardcore on our CTAs or our calls to action throughout this document so that people understand what it is that is occurring that we want them to do, most importantly. Additionally, we wanted to provide a variety of content because not everyone is interested in the exact same things. So there's a diversity of medium in terms of podcast, video, articles, PDFs, etc. that's included in here. And on the far right, we launched something called the Catch of the Month Photo Showcase. We need more assets as an agency, and paying for photography is expensive. So this is sort of a sneaky way to get some additional engagement with our customers, give them an opportunity for a brag board, so to speak, while also collecting imagery that we can use in our respective publications. Next slide, please. And lastly, as I previously mentioned, ODFW has produced a report. It is inclusive in the appendices of the entire survey tool, the analysis for which we've done, as is the retention plan in total. If folks are interested, please feel free to email me or give me a call, and I'm happy to share that content with you. So thank you again for the opportunity to present. And Joanne or Stephanie, I'm happy to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Amanda, for sharing all of this. And thank you, Amanda, Jane, and Brittany, for sharing all this great information and the exciting efforts happening in your states to retain anglers. It's great insight, so thank you for taking the time to share it with other states today. And now I'll turn it back to Joanne for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Steph, and thank you very much, Brittany, Jane, and Amanda. We will now address some questions. We've received a few, but if you have any now, please go ahead and type them into the question and answer box on the right side of your screen. So the first question we have is for Brittany. It is, what system are you using to deliver the retention emails?
So currently, we are using Robly as our email deployment system, but we've recently, we're about to switch over to Salesforce, and it's exciting for us because that's where we're going to be able to actually implement those customer journeys.
Okay, great. The next one, I think this is for Jane. Folks requested to hear more information by email. So curious, is there some bias based on how the survey was disseminated? Was the survey shared outside of email?
No, this was a survey-only email. We didn't have a lot of robust survey tools, and we put it together really quick because we thought getting something back that we could use to get some action on was probably better than taking the time to do a really long survey that would be a little bit more robust. So we did it really short, and we did it via email. And if folks asked questions, we tried to direct them where they could take it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. Also for Jane, there was lots of great content, ideas, and tactics. Were you able to compare the effectiveness of these various topics and tactics and vehicles?
We're working on comparing some of those right now. We are hoping to come back and do another bit of a survey that asks people what types of tools they have seen and if they have been aware of our emails and other things that we have done. So we don't have a lot of feedback just yet, but we're kind of working to do that, again, to try to figure out where to put our efforts and what people are using and getting the most use out of.
Gotcha. Yeah, that'd be great to learn more about those tactics. Another question also for Jane is, you mentioned we. Did you have one project manager or multiple marketing staff working on this with fisheries and other communications staff?
It's a team effort, and so I may be the one talking here, but we have a really good team. We have a couple folks that are helping us from the fisheries division with content, Larry Pape and Daryl Bauer, and they're doing a lot of the fishing related content and equipment related content and things like that. And then we have on the communication side, we have our news manager, Jerry Kane, and our public information director, Shauna Richter Ryerson, and our social media manager, Kristen Carter, who is really helping Christy, our director of communications, and myself do a lot of this. And then I have a person that's devoted just to doing emails, Renee Bloom, and we're also working with our ad agency to do some of those reverse IP search type things. So it's a big team, and we try to coordinate our efforts and keep everything going. And I think the more people you can loop into it to help you, the better, because the more you can push this out, people tend to find the bits that they're interested in and take it and run with it. So it takes everybody. It's definitely a team effort, and I'm very thankful for the good team members that I have that can do all of this.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely takes a team. Thank you, Jane. Another question we've had, I think this is for Amanda. Can you go into the customer journey and how that, sorry, hang on. I think that question got cut off. Let's come back to that one. Okay. Do any of you have retention goals for this year?
Right now, what we're working on is some additional secondary research to help us more legitimately refine those efforts. We had 162,000, about 163,000 new customers to us in 2020. The honest goal is we want 163,000 customers back. And we're doing everything we can within our power to do that. We have a series of different evaluation metrics to help us understand from reporting who's coming back in what particular segments, and then we can refine our retention efforts accordingly.
I would echo that. We kind of have the same goal at Nebraska, that we want all of those anglers coming back to us, and we're doing everything that we can to keep engaging them and keep pushing information out and keep reaching out to them to find out if there's anything else we can do, or to keep that fishing message in front of them. We're also working with our fisheries research folks on trying to do a little bit more in-depth research on these folks and segment them out by like lifestyle or type of customer journey, so that we can customize the information that we're doing and that we're serving them a little bit better. So we're trying to learn where we can and then implement what we learn in some more surveys that are coming down the road.
I'd say Arizona.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
At Arizona, we're very much the same. We don't have a specific number in place, but we're definitely trying to retain as many as we can. And much like Jean and Amanda were saying, we're also trying to look at the success of the things that we have that we're trying that are new this year, so we can see where to best focus our efforts, and keeping an eye on, like I said, as we start to have a better way of evaluating who is new and who's retained, focusing on improving our efforts in that respect too, and how we're actually able to track the data for our customers.
Awesome, fantastic, thank you. Looks like we have time for one more question. I'm going to go back to that customer journey one. I misread something. So can you go through the customer journey and how that works? Walk me through what the customer journey experience would look like.
So I think Brittany is also currently working on that. The customer journey for us is very much in alignment with ORAM, or the Outdoor Recreation Adoption Model. We need to be finding out from the first place where they are in that journey, so that we can make sure that we're onboarding them in the proper process. And then our job through that customer journey is to help them provide enough information and enough support to get them truly, at the end of the day, making another purchase and continuing to participate. The ultimate goal for us is that not only they will become fans and lovers of whatever activity they're participating for the sake of this call, angling. But we also want them to be able to be essentially ambassadors on behalf of the cause, so that they're able to recruit their friends and family into participation, and that they're also able to continue moving forward through that journey without any additional support. That's the holy grail right there, that they can get to the end, they can do this activity without feeling like they need the additional support. Part of our journey aspect is to make sure that we can maintain as much inspiration for them as possible to keep them motivated. At ODFW, we certainly recognize that we have a monopoly. If you choose to hunt or fish or shellfish, you must buy that license from us in Oregon. But at the end of the day, you don't have to hunt or fish or shellfish. We have to fight for you to come here. You could go paddling, you could go rock climbing, mountain biking, endurance running. So we need to stay relevant. And so that's another reason that we focus a lot on that in the customer journey aspect.
Yeah, that's great. That definitely makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I know we did not get to all the questions. However, we are doing a Zoom session starting just in a second as we close out this webinar. So if you want to join the Zoom session to ask your questions, please do. If you can't make it, we'll be sure to send you the answers to your questions via email a bit later. So please.